think the other piece of it sounds like a trite little line, but it really does work, is if you find yourself stuck in your own head, the easiest way to get out of your own head is into somebody else's. And to be curious. I think that curiosity is one of the most underrated skills. It is not a trait. I think it is a trait, but I think it's also a skill. And say, who can I be curious about today? Can I be curious about somebody related to the things that I'm anxious about?
Hello and welcome to the Exponential Scale Podcast, the show where we talk about how tiny teams with big ambitions are doing more with less, scaling smarter, not harder, and building big businesses with teams that can fit around a dinner table. I'm your host, Ron Schmelzer, and on today's episode, we're talking with Alex Hillman, who has built businesses since 2006, is a business educator and a coach, a community builder, author of the Tiny MBA, and, he's been teaching bootstrapped founders how to find customers before writing a single line of code for over 20 years. So, hi, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us on the Exponential Scale Podcast.
That's a great intro, and maybe one of the most succinct ones. I know I cover a lot of ground, and folks are often like, which word here? And I don't know where to start sometimes. So that was really well done. Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why, love to have you on this podcast. It's such a perfect fit. For those in our audience who aren't familiar with Alex, definitely encourage you to check it out. He's got a great personal website too at alex.10k.city, which is really nicely linked to all the things that he's doing. But he's also the founder of Stacking the Bricks and one of the co-founders founders of Indy, which is widely recognized as one of the world's first co-working spaces. I could personally attest to that, having run meetups in all these great co-working spaces, which was founded in Philadelphia, so hence the Indy Hall, back in 2006. It was great, like double wordplay on Indy and Independence, and Indy Hall and Independence Hall. It's fantastic. And also, together with co-founder Amy Hoy, he created the 30 by 500 course, which is a curriculum that's helped thousands of solopreneurs build real paying businesses, and their students have collectively earned conservatively well over $500 million, $500 million applying the 30 by 500 approach. And as mentioned briefly, he was also the author of the Tiny MBA, which is a book of 100 unconventional business principles for independent builders. And his newest project, 10K Independence, is focused on helping even more people break free from traditional employment. And that's such great sync with our audience. So maybe, Alex, I gave a little bit of intro there, it's mentioned, but, tell us a little bit about, how did you get into this space? Can maybe bring us into kind of where this all came from and where you are now?
Yeah. So, I mean, so again, 20 years of history to cover. I'll give you like a couple little snapshots. And I think that, the audience that you're speaking to and gathering and learning about is really who I was when I got started. I was a freelance web developer, but before that, I worked in some digital agencies. We were building websites, web apps, mostly like marketing and promotional vehicles, because it was mid 2000s. Apps were still very new. The iPhone didn't exist yet as a thing that is, like, I think, useful for framing that time sort of tech history. And I loved making stuff and putting it on the internet. I feel like I discovered a calling. The agency part of it was not my thing. I always say I'm a great worker. I'm a very hard worker, and I'm a terrible employee. And ended up wanting to leave the agency world. I started freelancing on the side, collaborating with some folks that I'd worked with at previous agencies. And I found that the thing that I wanted the most was, sort of my definition of freedom was choice. It was the ability to choose who I worked with, client side, collaborator side, what I was working on, when I worked, where I worked. That freedom to choose was really what I was drawn to. But the part that I really missed was having people to bounce ideas off of, smart people to learn things from, people who would understand when I wanted to celebrate or commiserate. But having come so closely and directly from agency land, I was like, I don't want that. Like, I have no desire to run an agency. Like, never mind the stress of payroll. It's just like, that's not what I want. I do want to remain independent, but that doesn't mean I want to do everything myself. I have a core set of skills, and I have other coworkers that I not just could collaborate with, but I really enjoy collaborating with. And so it started out as sort of my approach to starting like a micro agency of one, where sometimes I would come in to provide the web dev side of things for a designer or a business person. And sometimes I would bring in the business and I'd be looking for somebody to be the project manager and the database architect. And we had sort of this, Avengers style assembly agency model. And where it fell apart was I had a very limited network that I could tap. And so if the person my go-to for a thing wasn't available, then I had to go find them. And I realized very quickly that finding somebody with the skill that I needed was only part of the equation, and I'd argue a relatively small part of the equation. The thing that I had that I didn't even realize was an advantage in working with folks who I had worked with previously at agencies is we had trust. We had a working relationship. We had the rapport. We knew like each other's communication styles and expectations. And I knew that if you're quiet, it's not because you're mad at me, it's because your head's down and focused, and like all of those little nuanced things. And trying to figure that out in flight of a client project was a lot harder. And I don't want to say impossible, but I was not getting the same kind of experience from it. And so I started asking myself the question, what would it take to know more of those people before I need them? How do I have the coworkers without them being my employees and without us even necessarily actively working together? And started looking in my own backyard here in Philadelphia. And the weird tension was that it was easier to find those people in other cities like New York and San Francisco. Philadelphia's creative and technology scene, it was a bit dated, and sort of, I would say, backwards looking rather than forwards looking. There was some worldview compatibility there. And also, the people I could find were all trying to build these giant scale businesses. This is like very early, VC, the figure like 2005, 6, 7 is when, social media really starts to take off in '07. There was a groundswell before that of venture funded experiments effectively that led to things like Twitter, and Flickr and so on and so forth. So I didn't want to go move to those places. I wanted to stay in Philadelphia. And I was like, if I can find some of those people here, then I don't have to leave. And I did slowly find them, found my community, and eventually the club wanted a clubhouse. Co-working was extremely early. There was a couple of places in the world using the term to describe this sort of ad hoc gathering of people in a place to work, sort of an upgrade from the cafe or your second spare bedroom, but not necessarily an office either. And I was like, I think that's what we want. And so we developed a business model that would support it. And 20 years later, that community is still here. We made it through a pandemic. We're in the like fourth iteration of our co-working space. Um, and things are weird and ever changing, but the future feels bright for folks like us. And that's just the Indy Hall side of things. We didn't even touch on the parallel universe I was building kind of at the same time with Amy and Stacking the Bricks, but I'll stick a pin in that there so we can unpack any of that for you and for listeners.
Oh, good. Yeah, because I'm about to come up with that at just a great moment. And it is interesting how sort of things do come in cycles. When the internet was like first coming out, everybody was just on their own trying to figure things out. Even the venture world hadn't quite yet clicked into the big mega growth until actually really post the dot com boom and bust happened, of course. But really, a lot of the big companies who talk about now, they're actually all after the dot-com boom and bust, right? YouTube wasn't founded until 2004, 2005. Facebook wasn't even around. All these companies weren't really around. So it's interesting how all these things come in cycles. It actually does bring us to the stacking the bricks, which I love because it's another great metaphor. You're really good at the metaphors, I have to say. You come up with these great names. It's like, what does stacking the bricks mean? Well, it's like a very nice literal metaphor for what it means as a bootstrapped SaaS person, where you build things brick by brick and things sort of compound slowly. And compounding is really one of those amazing things, because if it takes you a lot of work to get to 1 million, it takes you twice as much work to get to 2 million, you're not really, gaining any sort of compounding effects. So when you put this together, maybe walk us through stacking the bricks, especially around like the operating philosophy. What is sort of the idea behind it? And given kind of where we are now, where things are coming in full cycle and we're moving maybe more back to a lot of empowered independence, what does this all mean for the
Yeah.
economy?
So in that era where venture capital was starting starting to get enough of a foothold that it had kind of brainwashed a ton of people into believing that it was not only a possibility, but it was the default or the only way. My partner Amy and I, we met in sort of the early days of both of our businesses. We met at South by Southwest in 2007, purely randomly standing in line for coffee or tea in the Austin Convention Center, and just like became friends, stayed in touch, and now we have a 20-year friendship, and most of that a business partnership as well. So Amy is a designer, among other things, and had built a little bit of notoriety in the early Ruby on Rails days, being a non-programmer but a designer who was teaching other designers how to program or how to understand programming. Her and her husband started a software company in those kind of early days of the SaaS business model ecosystem really taking off, especially the independent one, kind of, sparked by things like 37 Signals, and rework, and all of those kinds of ideas were very much in our orbit. And so Amy and her husband Thomas, Amy moved to Vienna. They got married. They lived there. They started this software company as a time tracking software that's still up and running, still making money, called Noco. And I had started Indy Hall. And the thing we both had in common is we were sort of internet creative people who had built a business that wasn't a services business. It was a product business. In her case, software. In my case, Indy Hall. And by product in this particular case, I mean something that you create once and you can sell over and over and over, versus a service where when you sell it, you then have to deliver on, it's usually an hours based, or there's a time scale component to it. And time is really the defining constraint of the work. Whereas if I work on Indy Hall, a version of Indy Hall can serve 1 people, 5 people, 15 people, 30 people, 100 people. And while things may shift a little bit, there is a scale opportunity where the core resource is usable by more than one person. So Amy and I started these very different businesses, but the thing that was remarkable at the time about them is we had customers on day one, and people were baffled by that. And they said, well, like, you guys aren't necessarily famous. Like, you've got some, again, she had some notoriety in the Rails world, and I had found my way into some certain, I would say it was like extremely locally famous, tiny little niche circles. I was well known, but outside of those, I was an absolute nobody.
Yeah.
I said, well, how did you do that? And so we started sharing what we had done, and it was interesting, and even more so in hindsight, how both of us followed the same instinct, which boiled down to, we found communities that we already belonged to. We were already a part of these communities. So we had some built-in knowledge and understanding. And then we didn't just go out and ask them what they needed. We actually actively observed and watched carefully and studied, and more of an observational research. And then took those patterns back and said, I think that the core problem isn't anything any one person said. It's this sort of amalgam of these other things. And if I can kind of create something that solves that amalgam, it actually makes the problem go away, rather than kind of patching up all the holes in the problem universe that a person or a business has. And because we had known those people, we had done work to help them solve all those little problems before we offered them something to solve the big problem. They trusted us. They knew we could deliver. They knew that we were trustworthy. They knew that we had aligned interests and goals. And they just knew who we were to a degree as people. And for any reason, that is the complete opposite of the narrative that was being pushed in and by the Bay Area and the venture capital world, which is come up with a brilliant idea, go get some rich people to write you a check so you can go in your hidey hole and build it, and then you launch it to the world, and then the world wants to buy it from you, and you make $1 billion. Is the fairy tale version of this, obviously.
Right.
And so people, we were watching our friends kind of hop from startup job to corporate job, from one kind of misery to another, occasionally go and raise a bunch of venture capital themselves, and then realize they just have a different kind of boss and still be miserable. And they're asking us like, well, can you help us? And so the very first version, before there was a thing called Stacking the Bricks, before there was a course called 30 by 500, and before I was involved, was Amy offered up a conference call. It was like $100 to buy a ticket to a conference call where she was going to lay out her playbook for everything that they had done up to launch so that they would have customers on day one. This is the playbook I followed. Here's what worked. And here's some of the stuff that didn't. And I think it was 9 people signed up for that call. And so, like, not groundbreaking amounts of money for her, but an engaged audience. And that follow-up feedback was that was amazing. That was so much more accessible and relatable and useful than all of the sort of startup pornography that's kind of floating around, these stories that make you feel like you know how it's going to go, but then they just don't line up with reality in any way. This actually feels like something I can do. This feels like me. What else you got? And so that was when Amy came to me and said, "Hey, let's figure out what we can do together," and started writing, started publishing, started a newsletter, and then started shaping a curriculum that has taken many different shapes and forms, from like a semester long course to a 2 day deep dive boot camp to the current version, which is more of a like a self-guided modular, but still very interactive self-guided course model. But through all of it and all the different mediums and formats, the core thesis has been the same, which is there is an audience that you are best suited to serve. That if you can find those people, then you can watch those people and you can learn from those people by watching. And what you learn by watching is different from what you learn by asking. And then if you synthesize what you learn by watching, you have an infinite well of resources to pull from in terms of things that you can use for everything from your content marketing to your actual product concepts, ideas, features, and so on and so forth. And the system that is built around that is really just a bunch of interconnected pieces that center around that research methodology, which we call Sales Safari. And again, bunch of little pieces that we've spun off of that. We've got like a standalone Sales Safari workshop. Tiny MBA was a product I released in 2020. Just Effing Ship is another like a microbook and ebook that Amy wrote for the people who are great at starting things but struggling to finish them, or people who even struggle to start them as well. So 21 principles that are like designed to help you like look at yourself, look at your work and go, I do have the capacity to do this. I'm just missing a skill or a tool or a framework. And the book can kind of give you a buffet of those to learn from. And the last thing I'll say is like that side of my work has been some of the most rewarding over my career because we've had a chance to not only help people start, a business that let them, maybe leave a job. In some cases, just have some extra money to take their family on a nice vacation once a year. But there's the people who said, no, I want to start a business and use it as a bridge to leave their job. And many of them, I'd argue the vast majority of them, are one person businesses who are earning multiples of what they were earning as a salary, often for a whole lot less work and stress. Sometimes, there's periods where business ownership, you're just trading problems for a different class of problems is, I think, an important truth in all of this.
Right.
But, and then we've got people who have grown to have, small but mighty teams. And I think through all of them, the stories of success it's not really been about how many commas people have coming in per year, but about how it lets them go to more of their kids, baseball games or school plays, or, be there for their partner when their partner's going through something tough or whatever it is. And it's like the way that running this kind of business allows you a certain reality, allows you to choose a certain set of realities that I think a traditional job doesn't, but that a hyperscale company also doesn't. I think most people aren't cut out for the hyperscale, and that's not a critique. I don't think we need more of it, and I don't think most people will be good at it. But I think people see that and they think, well, if I can't be good at that, I shouldn't start a business. And I just want to plant in people's heads is like most people aren't good at that. The people who are doing it aren't very good at it, I would argue, most of the time. But that doesn't mean you can't be good at running a business that takes care of yourself, your family, and your community, whatever that means to you. And if you kind of recalibrate the goal of what entrepreneurship success looks like to what I just said, you can take care of yourself, your family, and your community, whatever that means to you. Then the shape of how you can approach everything changes in a pretty dramatic way, and one that I think is actually accessible to way more people than realize they should even try.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a very attractive vision for entrepreneurship for maybe an increasing number of people. And I think, maybe movies like Social Network and HBO shows like Silicon Valley kind of put this other way of thinking in it. But I think things are changing. People see that maybe the end outcome of the venture game isn't necessarily worth all of the strife. There's a lot of sort of things that are being pushed as sort of the way things should be in venture world, which are not actually very healthy. The whole 996 idea of working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week just to compete with other countries. Or I've seen so many venture people say that the idea of work-life balance is stupid. And I think to myself, it's like the whole purpose of living is to live, is not working, right? And
Yeah.
so and also now people are starting to see that these other paths of success that provide financial independence and the optionality of having all that while at the same time giving them a solid quality of life. I think a lot of people be happy with a $10 million a year business with just a couple people and not being $1 billion a year business that they're living life into. So I think this is resonating, and I'm going to link to all the things you mentioned because you mentioned a lot of things.
Cool.
Safari. But let's actually get into the methodology a little bit, because I'm really interested in this leverage. So this 30 by 500 methodology is built on the idea of the research phase is where leverage actually lives. And I think a lot of founders, I like it to the just effing ship it, right? Is part of this. And also a lot of what you talked about, just get into the room with a lot of people, listen to them, observe them. That's more than just talking with them. It kind of gets on to the whole ICP idea too. So I think many founders treat research as just sort of box they check, or like, let's just get into my room and build stuff. So what does getting this right like really look like? And what does it produce that is, I would say, different from what maybe most founders are being told to do with like
Yeah.
lean startup and all this sort of stuff. Yeah.
So a couple of things. I think the most common, well, I'll back up a little bit. A lot of times folks will come to me with an idea and they're saying, oh, this is the thing that I want to start, or I have just started, and maybe it's going well. If it's going well, they're trying to figure out, well, what do I do next? And if it's not going well, they're trying to figure out, well, what do I do next? And the common theme through all of them is that it's centered around an idea. And I would say, I don't judge ideas based on whether they are good or bad ideas. I think there are dangerous ideas. I think there are very fun ideas. And an idea can be both of those things at the same time. But a good idea is like, well, but for whom, right? And so we really need to answer a couple of other questions. And so I always come around and I say, well, let's start here. Who are we making this for? Who is this for? And very few people, they say, well, I'm going to figure out what it is, and then we'll validate it around the audience. Like, if you're validating, you're already 10 steps behind. If you've ever been through a validation process, you know how exhausting and demeaning it is to try 3, 7, 14, 20 infinite things in a row and hope that one of them is right. And I get where the idea of the lean startup was coming from, but I don't think they actually read the books and took away the same things that the authors intended. Because if they had, it's not just about having a systematic approach for testing. It is about having a deep understanding of the thing you were testing against, which is that there's a missing prerequisite step. And so when we tell our students, and anyone who approaches, like, well, who is it that we're creating something for? Do you have the means to reach them? And that doesn't necessarily mean, do you already have an email list? Do you already have customers? It's like, do you have access to those people? If today you had to go talk to 5 of them, would you know where to go? And that can mean online or offline. Do you understand where they are, where they gather, and how? And then the third piece is, do they have a reason to buy from you? Do you have a unique experience that they would look at and be like, that sounds like somebody I would want to actually get that from? And that could be, insider experience and knowledge. It could be a perspective or a point of view. It could be a network of relationships that simply say, oh, if they're friends with those people or they are notable to those people, there's sort of a fungibility of trust that happens there as well. So that's all before we're even talking about what the thing the business creates and sells is. It's, who are you making it for? I think it's the step that so often people either skip over entirely, or if they do it in one of two kind of half ways. One of which is they never get specific enough, and by that I would mean, like, the worst version is anybody in one category, right? Or in one industry. And I say industries can work well, but if you don't know where to approach those people in that industry, maybe you start with a role, a specific role that operates within that industry, or a job title, or a stage of growth or progress, or whatever it might be. Kind of like map it like a network of nodes, right? And go, well, who am I best suited to speak to first? Who's my entryway in? And there's other people who hedge and they go, well, it could be this group or this group or this group. And I would say, well, if you're researching three at once, that means each one is getting 33% of the quality of the research. I get the hedge, but I think you'll get a whole lot further faster if you actually in on one and rank them by some kind of advantage. And if all else is equal, I firmly believe you're better off picking one and getting really good at it than picking two and being okay at both. So that's really sort of the origin of the mechanics. And when we teach in 30 by 500, the very first thing that we do is we're not talking about ideas. In fact, we're trying to kind of decouple people's emotional attachment to those ideas and instead go, let's start with the who and where you can find them. And then we set people loose into what we call watering holes, which would be any kind of gathering predominantly online, which obviously has shifted pretty dramatically over time. But I think the core mechanics are still the same, is that people seek out knowledge and information and insights and patterns and news from people and sources they trust. And if you can figure out where they get that and participate in that ecosystem, it is the most reliable way for you to earn that trust as well, to become one of the people they seek it out from, versus trying to stand in the middle of a metaphorical empty field and yell at the top of your lungs and hope that somebody hears you. Or conversely, to stand in the middle of Times Square surrounded by a million other people shouting. This is sort of the Twitter side of the analogy, would be, going on Twitter and shouting your thing into the ether when you've got nothing to hook onto. I would say when it comes to places like Twitter or any other sort of social media, LinkedIn, like the power's in the comments, the power's in the participation and being a part of that ecosystem, where you are, I would say, listening 80% of the time, doing your observational research, taking notes, and then synthesizing those notes. And then the 20% is actually getting in the comments and trying to be helpful. I would say most good marketing is being helpful in public. Because if you help one person in private, that can be really good marketing. It's a great way to get a lead, is to do a little bit of something for them that helps them get a leg up, right? There's a little bit of reciprocity in that, where you help them, so they're a little more likely to help you in return. There's the learning that comes from it and all of those kinds of things. But the thing that's missing is other people don't get to see that you helped them. And so I think the most valuable marketing that we teach our students is sort of an entire universe of things we call ebombs, or educational bombs, because you're dropping bombs of education. We may need to revise that metaphor for these days, but the
How
term
about
is
nugget?
stuck.
Make them nuggets.
It's a nugget. We're dropping
There you go.
nuggets. It makes me uncomfortable for other reasons. Um, but
I'm thinking golden nuggets and chicken nuggets, but I hear you.
so I think the key here is finding people who you can help in public. And again, I think a part that people forget, I can describe all the mechanics of this, is there's also a mindset that is required in going into this, and that is one of service. And I think people do say, I'm going to do all this stuff so that people will follow me, so that people will buy from me. And I think that is another kind of hedge that makes it less effective overall. And if you show up genuinely helpful with the goal of helping, you will be met with genuine reciprocity. If you show up with I'm going to help you so I can get something later, it's not even that it has a smell on it, although sometimes it absolutely does. It just doesn't work as well. And so I think it really comes down to, and to tie this back to like the core thesis of your work and your podcast, is I think if you can get good at helping people in public, that is one of the greatest levers that I've had in my career. To tie this back into the Indy Hall story, I started writing about it. You mentioned my personal site, dangerouslyawesome.com, personal blog. I started that when I was in college. I started writing about web development stuff. And when I started doing Indy Hall, I just started writing about what I was doing, what I was learning, what I was trying, what I was experimenting with, what the ideas were, what I was hearing back. and also the milestones along the way of what Indie Hall was becoming. And about a year or so into Indie Hall's existence, I started getting emails from people, from strangers, saying, "Thank you for that article." And I would say, "You're welcome, but what article?" And they would link to a blog post I had written, not for an audience, but largely for my own self, and maybe for our community as like a historical artifact. And they were like, "No, that like to see how you were thinking about that completely reframed the way I was approaching this, and it worked so much better than what I was trying, so thank you." And I think that kind of imprinted on me how valuable it is to be helpful for the sake of being helpful, and know that on a long enough arc, it's all going to come back in multiples. And if ever, and this is not, it sounds like a, all right, you learn that one thing and learn that once, and then that becomes the pattern for everything. And the truth, like I've applied it to everything intentionally since I realized it worked, and it's only worked better, right? It solves so many business problems in that way that, I think a lot of this is true of all businesses, but I think it crushes very small businesses as they end up spending all their time solving the problems they created for themselves instead of the problem they set out to create. I'm sorry, instead of the problem they set out to solve, right? So if you're spending all your time solving the problems you created for yourself and never getting to solve the problem you intended to, the business is going to suffer. How do you how do you avoid those preventable problems? And I think that almost all of them are preventable if you deeply understand who your customer is, why they buy from you, and what the rest of the problems they have are besides the one problem that you solve with your core product or service.
Yeah. I feel that very deeply. And there actually were a lot of little nuggets, E-bombs in there if you wanted to go back and take some notes, because there's like about 20 different things you said that are just so valuable. But the thing that I feel deeply is that it is uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of people, even who have been multiple times founders, to be in a place where they don't understand, maybe fully understand the problems, that it's easy to just kind of just, well, I know how to build, so I'm just going to build, or I know how to plan. I may plan, know how to strategize, and you kind of get into your own little world. But of course, that doesn't help anybody. And it's also there's like this feeling of like, well, I don't really fully understand something, so like there's a lot of this vagueness, and it's for a lot of people, it's very uncomfortable to be in a world where they don't have full understanding of what's going on. And I think this is not necessarily my position here, but I think some people also have pressure that, they need to generate income, or they only have so much time, before, they need to make a decision of, do I keep going, or do I, go back to the old corporate world? And I think for those folks who are kind of in that world of like the vagueness, not knowing when things are gonna, the switch is going to magically flip, this uncomfortableness of maybe the E-bombs where they're giving away stuff, but they're not really sure. They know that maybe inherently there will be a return, but there's this question as to when. How do you get past, which I would say is a lot of it's anxiety and fear, more than it is perhaps rooted in like some specific, cause.
Yeah. I mean, I always say like anxiety and fear are different versions of kind of being trapped in your own head, right? It's the thoughts are cycling in here, and I don't think you can change anything while the thoughts are still cycling in here. And so thing number one is like get them out of your head, whatever that requires. For me, writing is a big part of it, but for some people, it's talking, it's walking. I've encouraged folks to like build a habit. If you're in that kind of anxiety loop, like go for a walk, pull out your phone, pull out a voice memo, and just talk it out. And you don't need to have something talking back. You just need to talk it out. If you do need something talking back, this is a great use for something like a Claude AI thing. It's just like, don't ask it for advice. I want to put that as like, do not ask it for advice or feedback on this. Just say, hey, I'm talking through something, and even tell it I'm not looking for advice, not looking for validation. Maybe ask me some follow-up questions. That can be useful, but don't do those other things. I find that very useful for myself. But I think the other piece of it sounds like a trite little line, but it really does work, is if you find yourself stuck in your own head, the easiest way to get out of your own head is into somebody else's. And to be curious. I think that curiosity is one of the most underrated skills. It is not a trait. I think it is a trait, but I think it's also a skill. And say, who can I be curious about today? Can I be curious about somebody related to the things that I'm anxious about? because I think that anxiety is often rooted in our brains are trying to like fill in unknown gaps or running all of these different scenarios and trying to plug them up with hypothetical information. And for a wide range of reasons, they're likely to be wrong, either too optimistic or too pessimistic. I think both are just as bad. I think irrational exuberance is the same as like the hyper reflexive negative version of the same thing. And so it's like go and again, this is my pitch for Sales Safari is not just for customer research. We always joke Sales Safari is for every day. If you are in your head and cycling and anxious, pick a place that your audience hangs out and go read and go take notes and study for their problems. Spend more time thinking about their problems than yours. That anxiety melts away in the most incredible way, and that's in the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is you start learning something, and then the emotion shifts from anxiety to, oh, I understand this. I am good at this. I can help these people. And then, the last bridge to cross is usually one of, well, are these people that I want to help? Which is, I think, another interesting thread that we can tug on is, you know, if there are things and attributes about certain audiences that you don't find attractive or you find actively repulsive, people are often ready to throw an entire audience away because they're like, oh, I'm a software engineer and I really just don't want to work with software engineers anymore. And I'll say, like, look, that is totally fair, but you're giving up your greatest advantage. What if, stay with me here, those folks that you have those relationships with were that way because of some relationship dynamic, probably power, position, authority, whatever it might be. What if, how would that relationship change if they came to you more often for help? And they think about it for a second and they go, it's different from, the gray-haired boss who doesn't know how to work a PDF and needs you to open for them. I'm talking like actual meaningful help. And they'll go, that would have actually been really nice. And I'm like, that's what these people on the internet are asking you for. You get to be the person who helps them. And you get to be the person who comes to them asking for help. And it's a psychological reframe of who that person is, because that person is their own entire identity. And in a large degree, it is your job to do your best to understand it and what that person wants and why. But you also have to look at it in the context of you. And if in the past you've always been a subordinate, you've been, to some degree of powerless, it changes when they perceive you as someone who can help them, who maybe has something that they want and need, and the dynamic changes dramatically. And so I always encourage folks, like, if you're anxious about the audience you're serving and they're not actively harming people, which is, I think, one of the only really good universal reasons to not serve an audience is if they're bad people doing bad things in this world. Then, or not just bad, but it's like something that's out of alignment with your morals and values. Then is there a version of that audience that the relationship would change if you found a way to help them with the resources and skills you already have? And with that little reframe, I find a lot of the most common root causes, rather than again trying to band-aid the anxiety, the root cause, the anxiety starts to go away. And then you get to start focusing with clarity on who are these people and how can I help them? Because you know that so long as you stay laser focused on that, all the distractions like your competition, like the whatever the drama of the day is, whatever bad decision the company and your ecosystem made. Those are all distractions trying to pull you away. That's the entropy of reality trying to pull you and your business off track. If you know exactly who the outcomes you care about and it's your audience and your customer, you can confidently ignore so much of the other stuff that drives your stress levels up and just focus on helping those people.
That's fantastic. Well, obviously, a lot of your customers have seen some good results here because collectively, as we mentioned earlier, they have earned over $500 million applying this 30 by 500 approach. That's remarkable because a lot of these are like, what, 1, 2, 3 people operations, very small operations. So from your visibility, like, what separates the students who are successfully stacking the bricks and compounding versus the ones who maybe they take the course, but they're still stuck? Was it a lot of what we just talked about, or was there some other little insight, especially from the ones who are succeeding?
I mean, it's a lot of that. There's a lot of reasons people don't start or stop very early, and I think a lot of the things I just described are covered in there. I mean, say the number one reason people don't succeed is because they learn it. They maybe think they internalize it, but they do nothing and they change nothing. And that's the most reliable way to not succeed is to do nothing. And there's the people who apply it inconsistently or they kind of cherry pick things before they get good at it. I think that that's a defining factor. I think it kind of like is in line with that curiosity. People who are like the people who do best are the ones who are most comfortable with being bad at something new. This was a weird thing to learn, especially because most of our students are high performers within their field or category. They've done what they do long enough to get really good at it. And they come to us and they want to learn this new skill set. And we tell them up front, 100 different ways you're not going to be good at this at the beginning. That's why you're here. This is going to take practice. It's going to seem deceptively easy. You know, how hard is it to go on the internet, read and take notes? It's not as easy as it sounds like if you're trying to do a good job and to follow a process that is reliable and repeatable. And so one of two things happens. They either like adapt it before they learn it. They like watch a video of us doing it and then they make up their own version, not really understanding why the version that we teach them works. And then they get frustrated when it doesn't work, or worse, they tell us that the thing we taught them doesn't work. And I say, well, that's because you're not doing the thing we taught you. You're doing a version you made up, and that's fine. But practice, like do the thing, do it over and over until it starts feeling like second nature. Or there's the people who, here's the weirdest one, Ron. The people who do it and it works, and they do it a second time and it works, and they do it a third time and it works, and they've got that momentum building, that the kind of the promise of if you do this repeatedly and consistently, it will feel impossibly slow, like you're not making motion. But if you keep going, it starts to build momentum like a snowball. And they finally get there and they launch their first product and they're making, maybe it's a few thousand extra dollars, maybe it's, you know, upwards of 10, whatever it is, whatever, any amount of money. I would say this small, it's not the amount of money, it's the way the money comes in. When you get any amount of money from a stranger on the internet and you don't have to then spend more time to like earn out that payment because you already did the work for it. It just is a totally different feeling. But they finally have it. And then some version of, I think what people would call imposter syndrome or another form of insecurity pops up. They believe they're going to be found out as a fraud. They believe that, I think the most common one is they're afraid of now being on the hook. They're like, this worked once. What if I have to, does that mean I have to keep doing it? And instead of sitting with that moment and be like, yeah, that's the same thing as a job, except you have all the control of the knobs along the way. And they freak out and they self-destruct. And I've watched so many people start really well, but then some insecurity creeps in, or some story of comparison or something along those lines. And it's some of the weirdest and most frustrating things. And if I didn't see it 3 times in a row, I wouldn't have believed it was real. But for all the times people talk about the fear of failure, I find the fear of success to be even stranger and more common among people who are good at what they do and are looking to build the kind of business that we're talking about, which is one where, you know, there is, I think, when you're building a big business, there is a rush towards operationalizing and getting everything off your plate so you can kind of manage from the CEO position. You are there to execute and make decisions, but everybody else is actually implementing your work. And if it's just you or you and a very small team, it is a, you know, flatter, less hierarchical type organizational structure. And if you are spending all of your time in that structure, I'm going to be honest, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah. I mean, the people who are afraid of success, or like the
Oh, they're
people
afraid of success. Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes. So the people who, yes, I think so. It's as this like solo or small group team member starts to grow, the fear shifts from, I'm not afraid that this is going to work. It's now that this has to keep working. Does that mean I have to keep growing? Like, I don't know how to make the next milestone for myself. And I think that's maybe a key takeaway here is if you are used to having your next milestone handed to you, then this version of entrepreneurship can be really, really challenging because it can be kind of isolating. And so again, I think of how do you use the ecosystem around you, whether it is your clients, your customers, your audience, a small core team with you, and how do you decide when you've got a milestone you're working towards, how do you make sure that by the time you're launching your next product or your next feature, that you're not going to get to the other side of launch and not know what to do next. And there's this sort of like post-launch hangover where it's like, we did it. We did all that work. And oh my God, it actually worked. Well, what do I do now? And the fear of, well, I did all of that work and I don't know what to do next. I think people make shakier decisions versus before you have reached your next milestone, you should ideally know what your next couple of things might be so you can make an informed choice and apply the lessons from the most recent launch to the next thing rather than use the launch to decide what the next thing is.
Well, this is fantastic. Well, it's a kind of nice little tee up here because that's the community we're building at Scalabrate, and it's one of those things that is starting fairly small, and I know that it's part of our challenge as well as reaching out to those founders. That's the whole idea we're building, trying to build a membership network here of folks who are really mostly looking for support from others who are pursuing this path because it is. I would say to your point, it's difficult because in the venture world, there's a playbook. And you might think, okay, well, I'm at this phase. And to a certain extent, while, people give up control with the investors, what the investors are really doing is they're sort of driving the company in a particular direction. So there's a certain amount of, I don't need to really think too much. I just
Well,
got to
and also
follow
I
the
think
playbook. Yeah.
there's an like an absolution of responsibility too. Not absolution, abdication of responsibility. It's there's always somebody to point the finger at, right? Whereas like when it's you and there's not somebody else kind of pulling the strings, it's like, well, this all falls on me. And so like, I don't know, a thing that I've thought about a lot over the years is like I consider myself a pretty unskilled boss. I'm a very good leader. I'm a very bad manager. And I consider those two very different skill sets. And the thing that has resulted in it is I've had to get good at managing myself, but I'm bad at the outward management. And I feel like a lot of other folks are the opposite. They're better than me at managing other people, but they are really bad at managing themselves without some of those external pressures and counterpoints and all of those kinds of things. Another way you could look at it is I think a lot of people are only or predominantly good as a reactive decision maker. How do you make proactive decisions when there isn't a feedback loop to react to? And that feedback loop could be your investors or your customers or your family. Like those are all things that are again, external pressures on you and your business and your decisions. And that doesn't make them bad or good. They just are. They're forces of the physics of running a business. So I think just knowing that all those things are tugging and pulling, going, okay, which ones do I value? Which ones am I going to respond to? I'm going to respond. I should respond to my family, maybe more than I should respond to my investor if I've got such a thing, right? And just like making those decisions ahead of time allows you to, even when you're in a reactive mode, to do it more proactively, which sounds like an oxymoron. But like one of the things that I've done multiple times in my career. And with the AI stuff coming into it, my business partners actually kind of pushed me to do it again. And I'm really glad that they did is sit down before you have to make a hard decision or even a moderately hard decision. Sit down and try to decide how you would handle a different categories of hard decisions before your back is against a wall. What are your operating principles? This is sort of another lens on like what are your core values, your professional values, and a lot of times they get turned into just like 3 to 5 pithy words on a website or on the wall, right? I say no, let's operationalize them. What are the things you always do? Even if something is getting in the way, you're going to figure out a way to do it. And then what are the things you never do? Even if the incentive to do it is really high. Write those things down ahead of time so that when you're in that inflection point and one of those external forces of nature is pulling you one direction or the other, instead of figuring, and you still have to figure it out on the fly, but you're not figuring it out from zero. You can figure it out from first principles because you wrote them down. And so, like I said, for AI, my business partner, who is actually both of my business partners are fairly AI skeptical, and they've gone, I'd say, from skeptical to hesitant to figuring out what version of it actually makes sense for them and their desires and their needs and where are their boundaries. And what Adam said to me, he goes, I'm not worried about other people's perception, although I think we to a degree we were. It was more that he's like, I know that you've thought deeply about this and you've done your homework, but other people don't. So would it be valuable for us to have this written down so that they can see it, even if it's being shared and presented as this is a living document. This is what I've decided today for now. And so I've actually like sat down and written down a version of here's the things I always do and here's the things I never do when it comes to my usage of AI personally and professionally. And it's a living document. It's a thing that I'm working on, and we've even had just in the last 3 months a fairly short timeline. Have had scenarios where I was like, I think that problem or that bad situation was avoidable, would have been avoidable. That took us off track. It was a distraction. The value of it was I have a better understanding of a particular person's point of view or an outcome. And if I can consider that next time in my decisions, I can avoid the side quest, right? And so we update that document. So that's all. I've got that among a bunch of other like AI for small business owners who are trying. Like I'm not. This is for the business owner who's maybe like a systems minded person, not a programmer, because like I said, my background is technology, but I'm not really a software engineer. This is more like how do I use this stuff for my business in a way that is thoughtful, ethical, intentional, and is actually to my and my business's advantage versus just like chasing whatever the hype cycle or pattern of the or tool of the week is. This is stuff that is going to transcend, I believe, I hope, any particular tool trends in technology. I've got all that up at jfdi.bot
Okay.
is the newest website where I've started sharing videos and articles and stuff like that. But there's a whole post about the like ethics and values that I've sort of outlined for myself.
Well, that's fantastic. We're going to link to all of that. And I had like 20 more questions for Alex, but I want to be mindful of our guest time and our listeners' time as well. I mean, this isn't a Lex Fridman podcast, so I got to keep this things, tight. But this has really been fantastic. And, Alex, seriously, even I'm just like sitting here, like, listening, taking notes. I got to participate. I'm going to be signing up for this as well because I'm in that journey as well. Even though I've been through this before, started companies, run them successfully and had some successful exits. Every single time you're doing something new, it's that moment of discomfort and maybe it's time to learn from others and do things well and stack those bricks the right way. So before we end, I actually have three rapid fire questions we always ask every
Cool.
one of our guests here, whether they're CEO of Zapier, Gina of Mighty Networks, everybody always answers, and we always get different answers, which is just fantastic. So my question for you is first is about tools, because everybody wants to know this. So like, what is one tool or technology or automation or AI that you absolutely can't run your business without? The one that gives you and your team the 10x leverage every single week.
So I have been building and my own AI executive assistant. This is kind of my somewhere between like my personal professional journey with AI and my hot rod, where like this is both a thing I use every day and the thing that I'm really getting a lot of satisfaction in learning because it is also a thing that I get to tinker with and I get to see the immediate feedback loop of the impact it can have. And the second thing that I did when I started building this executive assistant, the first thing was a very simple link manager where I could drop any kind of link or quote or note. And it was basically like imagine a world where there's a junk drawer in your kitchen where you open the drawer, you put the thing in, you close the drawer, but when you open it again, it's automatically filed to the correct place so that you can find it again later. I built that for my links, and that's amazing, but that's not the thing I want to talk about. The thing I want to talk about that has been the 10x leverage for my business, because as you can hopefully tell, like for me, business is all about people. Like I love making things, I love sharing things, but it's the people on the other side that is really the whole point of it for me. And I think that's a big part of the reason I've had the kind of success that I have. Is I wanted a relationship manager, and I have tried every CRM in the world, and none of them have worked for me. And so I started asking myself, what would the ideal relationship manager look like, and how do I figure it out? And the AI tool, it's not a specific tool. I use Claude Code for everything, but the workflow is one that every single day it looks at my sent email. Who did I send emails to today? And now I've got my text messages looped in here as well. And it flags that as a high likelihood that there's a relationship I would care about there. And it starts building a dossier of that relationship and what our working relationship looks like, the projects we work on, the things that we care about, the things that would benefit us. And where that gets really useful is because that becomes part of my core knowledge base when I do other things, including filing links as an example, or I'm working on another project, all of that context is now available. And I realized that my email that I've been sitting on for the last 20 years using the same email address, my sent address, or my sent mailbox specifically, is maybe the most valuable trove of knowledge about myself, about my work, the way I prioritize. It's maybe the most honest look at who I am and what I have done professionally. And to be able to layer AI on top of that and have that be able to be readily included in context and surfaced. If I drop a link because I think it'll be useful and interesting later, for it to come back and say, well, that link is useful in this project, and here's three people who would find it useful. Do you want to send it to Ron, by the way? And like, it's not going to do the sending for me, but it helps kind of surface those things in my brain. And I think, this goes back to the open loops thing I was describing before, where it creates anxiety. I was holding too many open loops in my brain, whether it was tasks or promises or the desire to want to share a thing with a person, but I have a hard time remembering them. And so turning AI into this kind of connection mapping layer has been an absolute game changer because it makes me look like I'm paying attention to everything. And instead, what it's doing is it's really just surfacing hotspots and telling me where to direct my attention. And then I make the choice, is it right or wrong, and what to do with it.
Well, that's fantastic. I think a lot of us are building that little hot rod right now, and for our own perspective, for our own needs. And I think that may be part of this vision of where maybe AI is most helpful. It's not, one size fits all, but it's like one size fits one. This is fantastic, and I think that's perfect. Second, quick little rapid fire here is always the question about processes. So you've seen a lot of companies, you've seen a lot of successful ones, a lot of not successful ones. So from your visibility, what's one system or process that every small leverage first team should have in place by the time they hit their first $1 million in revenue that separates the scalers, the ones that are really getting that compounded growth, from the grinders, the ones that are just working, they worked really hard for that first $1 million, they'll have to work twice as hard for that second $1 million. Maybe what's one thing that you would tell them to stop doing, or one thing that they should really start doing today?
So I think and this is something I'm super guilty of too, is especially when you are either solo or a very small team and you're doing everything yourself, it is very easy to end up with a bunch of things that you do a certain way because you did them that way, and you kind of never go back to like say, is that the best way to do it, or could we do it a different way, or could we stop doing it entirely? So this is sort of a meta answer in that it's more of a process audit and to have some kind of rhythm. It is just so easy to, for 3, 6, 12, 24 months to pass, and you're like, I've just been implementing. I haven't actually stopped to look at what I've done, what's worked and well and what hasn't. And I'd say there's sort of two things that I think really set apart the folks who scale and when we've seen the greatest results. One is when we go in, we say the goal is to drop something. Like if we leave and we've dropped nothing, we didn't do a good job. So what's the one thing that we can clear out to make room for something that does need more breathing room? I think that's number one. It'd be okay stopping doing something, whether that's offering a product or a service, or saying like like it doesn't need to be broken to change the way you do it. You could be doing it in half the time or a quarter of the time, or at a shorter interval, or whatever it is. That's number one. I think the other is, what are the things that that are reusable? So I'll give you a real concrete example. For the first many years of 35500, we were handcrafting every single launch email from scratch. They followed a pattern and a rhythm, but we would start from a blank page every single time. And it wasn't until Amy got very sick and actually couldn't work with me on our next launch, where I was like, let me see what I can get out of the library. And so I went back and I pulled all of our past successful launch campaigns and kind of I did an analysis. Said, here's the ones that work the best, and here's who they work the best for, and here's what the outcomes were, and da 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 da. And I said, what if I were able to Frankenstein these together and create something that there's going to be some familiarity to it for people that have read these emails before, but only if you're paying the most attention And the truth that I've learned over the years is most people aren't paying nearly as much attention as we think they are. And that repetition is not a downside. If anything, I'd start getting emails from people who would say, I loved this email the first time you sent it. I'm so glad you sent it again. It was such a great refresher. I've never had somebody say, you've sent this email 3 times, unsubscribe me. And so reusing the byproducts and assets. So when you create a thing and it works, so often we just move on to the next thing instead of figuring out a way to make it reusable, re-implementable, whether it is using it for parts or using it wholesale. That is going to be very contextual, and we've had a lot of success doing both. But I think back to the core stacking the bricks methodology is all about using the advantages you have to build the ones you don't have yet. And when you start thinking about everything you make as it's not guaranteed to be an asset, but if you look at it and go, how could this be useful later? And the answer is, I'm not sure, but maybe, then you have the makings of an asset. And it may influence how you finish, or where you leave things. Like right now, when we do client launches, I'm very intentionally trying to build not just the launch, but build the scaffolding and the templates and the structure to make the next launch easier and smoother and less likely to have those little, paper cuts of oh shit, we forgot about that, or you know what I'm talking about. And so it's looking
Exactly.
for those offcuts. It's not so much about looking for efficiency. I feel like the constant chase of efficiency is going to pull you in a different direction. This is more about I think thinking of any unit of your work as an investment and going, if I treat this work not as time that passes, but as an investment in future me's ability to do a better job, I think the lens shifts and a lot of things change for the better.
Yeah, we know standard operating procedures. It's more repeatability and predictability and consistency. But to do that so that, yeah, your time is valuable. It's the one thing you can't make more of, get more of. So being wise there. It's great advice. And the last rapid fire is just a general tip. Now, I've already given a lot of tips here, but perhaps if there's an additional piece of advice, maybe to a founder who's running that dinner table sized team right now who wants to scale, maybe what's one additional thing you might share, perhaps something we didn't get a chance to discuss in this podcast.
I mean, I've got two answers. One is I always ask, why do you want to scale? And there's not it's not a judgment. I was very careful asking. It's like I pass no judgment on people who choose a different path than the one that I would choose, so long as you're choosing it on purpose. And are you scaling because you think it's the right thing to do, because other people have told you it's the right thing to do, or because it gets you closer to your goals? So the question, answer one is have a very good, clear answer of what scaling does to get you closer to your goals. Your goals are the ones that matter. And if you want to expand from your goals, that can include your core team, your dinner table size team, and include your clients and customers. Keep that alignment in the conversation as you scale. That might be the second half here is like, I think scaling tends to lead people to make a different set of decisions and forget who got them there in the first place. And so, can you involve them in some way? In terms of like operational things when it comes to scaling, I think in terms of tests and experiments and going, I think that there's a time to burn the bridges and push to the next chapter or do the next thing. I think it's exceedingly rare. And when I see people do it as a pattern, I'm like, well, for me, that just says that you have not figured out your internal consistency yet. So I think, scale is often used as cover for change, and I don't think that's a bad thing inherently. But I think my challenge would be how can you scale and change the things that will make you better and keep the things that made you good, right? Knowing what makes you good at what you do as you scale, I think is maybe more important than people realize because it will inherently have to change. And the only thing that I really care about when we're talking about change is that it's done on purpose versus you do it by accident because you're rushing. So I think scale and speed are often conflated with each other. I don't have an inherent problem with either of them. But I think when they're pursued as ends unto themselves, I think is where we get pulled off track. So just knowing about that and being comfortable having those conversations, and especially, I think one of the superpowers of a dinner sized table team is you can have a different kind of relationship about everyone's relationship to power and speed and just get honest. Like it's trade-offs all the way down. There's very few right or wrong answers here. Everything is about trading one thing for another. And so long as everyone's on the same page about what those trade-offs are, I don't think you can go that wrong. And certainly not so far in a direction you can't undo those changes.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, that's some great tips and advice there. So, yeah, I just want to thank you so much. I mean, Alex, you, first of all, been very generous with your time. Really great to respond. Just, I think, fantastic insights specifically for this community. We need to hear more folks from people like you and people in this community to share what they are doing to build something that's sustainable and scalable to whatever that definition of scale is. And I think this is fantastic. So, Alex, just want to thank you so much for joining us on the Exponential Scale podcast.
Thanks, Ron. It was great to be here.
Yes. And so before I let you all go, just want to let you know Alex does have a free ebook copy of the Tiny MBA that's available at stackingthebricks.com. Hopefully that's still correct.
Hmm?
Great. And it gives you 100 business principles that every independent founder should have. So go grab it. I'll be linking to a lot of the other things that we mentioned here in the show notes. So definitely take a look online as well as share with all your friends. And as always, we'll leave you with the weekly mantra. And from this podcast, I want you to get out of your head and into your customers' heads and focus on what people really want. And if you really loved this interview with Alex Hillman, I want you to hit the subscribe button and leave a review and share it with that founder friend who's still building in their head and on their system and not getting in front of the people that matter. So I want you to think big, stay lean, and scale smarter. Micro teams aren't the future, they're the now. If this episode got you fired up, hit that subscribe button, share it with your crew, and join the movement over at scalebrate.com. That's SCALEBRATE.com. Till next time, think big, stay lean, and scale smarter. Because you're not a tiny team, you're a micro team with mega potential. So get exponential, and thanks for tuning in to the Exponential Scale Podcast.